So I'm Dave Padilla, CEO and executive producer at Hyperkinetic Studios, a mobile development studio based in Los Angeles. So just to kind of give you a quick background, I started in game development 13 years ago with a dream job in Activision QA, and it was everything that I had imagined it would be, basically getting paid to play video games, which was amazing. And from there, I was able to get into the production track, which allowed me to eventually realize that I wanted to go solo and that I wanted to have my own studio. And I felt like the production track was the best place to do it. And I developed a little bit of experience, and eventually in 2008, I had the opportunity to found my own game development studio with a couple of other partners. And that was during the App Store boom. But the thing is that I felt like production had really given me all the tools that I needed to deal with starting up a studio, but it turns out that that wasn't necessarily really the case. And after a couple of months of development, we actually imploded, and we all went our own separate ways. And looking back, I realized that there was a large amount of stress in those days simply because there were a lot of unknowns. And after a couple of months went by and I had really had some time to think about it, I realized that there were 5 key things that caused stress. Not understanding the developer-publisher relationship, not knowing enough about funding, not knowing how to manage a project, allowing worries to cloud vision, and accepting failure as a reason to stop. So let me talk about them a little bit more in detail. So coming from a AAA mentality, especially when you're at a development studio, it usually meant that the developer was always right and that creativity trumped everything else, especially in business. But that's not really necessarily the case, because what happens when you start developing a mentality like that is that you develop a very myopic view of what the creative process is like. So you start thinking that because you're the developer, it's your idea that's key and it's going to cause everything to succeed. And that really starts kind of limiting what you're able to do. And the key thing that I found out is that, especially when you're doing casual games, it's a very kind of symbiotic relationship where you have to understand where the publisher is coming from, and publishers usually have a lot of insight and a lot of information that developers don't really seem to have, especially when you're starting up. Like if you don't understand how marketing works, if you don't understand KPIs, user acquisition, even the importance of let's say just A/B testing. I mean, it's super critical for games to succeed, and it's not the most important thing, but it's definitely something that's critical. Now, if you don't understand the publishing side, I mean, you do have to make a point of really figuring out where they're coming from, and part of it is, having the conversations with them and developing relationships so that you get a critical understanding of where they're coming from. A couple of other things that really helped out too is, at the time, I believe the Deconstructor of Fun website was around. And that gave me, especially as a developer, some insight into what some of the more successful games were doing, and understanding some of the tools that they use to, to be fun, but also to monetize well. Funding. So when you work at a AAA studio, sometimes you have this idea that money is pretty magical, right? You don't really think about it very much, but you're able to work a lot of overtime. You're given free food. If you need resources, people magically show up on your project, but that's not really the case, right? Money has to come from somewhere, but we didn't have that mentality when we went into it. We felt that because we had fun ideas, because we were developers and we had a lot of experience, that was going to be enough to really carry us, but that's not the case. Money is super critical, and for us, we knew money was critical, we just didn't know how to get it. We didn't know what to do with it. And on a very fundamental level, especially on the production side, you need to have a good understanding of budgets. You need to have an understanding of what revenue means, profits. Bottom line is that you're never going to get anywhere without it. So what I realize is that one of the things about money is that if you have a good relationship with people, especially with publishers or people who have access to work for hire projects, then by having those relationships, when they start thinking of who they're going to go to give a project to, you want your name to come out. You want your name to be like the standouts where they're thinking of somebody and then they realize that you're available, that you have the ability to take on these projects, and that's critical. But the thing is that you're not going to have these relationships if you don't network. And I've met a lot of developers over the years who feel that their name is going to be enough to carry them over. That's not necessarily the case. Sometimes you have to make an effort to go out there and to talk to people at mixers, regardless of whether it is, just introducing yourself, talking about your favorite movie, or talking about how much you hate clickbaits. It doesn't matter. You just have to make an effort to talk, and through that conversation, you can at least start talking to them a little bit more about your background, about what you're capable of doing, and really what your, kind of like what your future goals are going to be. The other thing too for running a business is really understanding how a business operates. And the good thing about the internet nowadays is that there are a lot of excellent tools that'll give you information about, how to start a business, how to form it, who you need to talk to, the importance of lawyers, the importance of accountants. So, I really advise you, like, if you are going to start a business, just start asking questions and start looking up information. The other thing too, as far as funding is concerned, a lot of indies tend to self-fund. Sometimes that can work, but you tend to find that if you are self-funded, you're going to hit that barrier where you're unable to pay people, when you're unable to get tools. So, take a look at all the different opportunities that you have for funding. Sometimes you can get loans. Oftentimes you get investors, and I know that there's a scariness behind it, but they're there. Work for hire projects, and also publisher relationships. So, money's there. It's just a matter of trying to figure out where it's coming from and who you need to talk to get it. So, in terms of managing a team now, when I was in production, I was in charge of a very specific group of people, and I didn't really have a full understanding of why it was critical for programmers to talk to artists about a specific way that an asset was needed, or about the importance of memory savings in terms of texture optimizations. I was just so focused on one specific view, and a lot of people in production, especially in AAA, are simply in charge of one specific subset of the whole project. So when it comes time to have your own team, you don't necessarily know how it all is supposed to tie together. And the thing too is, if you have a specific group that you're in charge of, generally you'll tend to find that that group is the one that in your mind is the most important. So for instance, if you're in charge of an animation group, for you, you're going to take a look at the animators and try to, and you're going to give them the highest priority on the project. But again, even within a production group, I mean, it is important for you, if you're going to manage it, to know how it all ties together. All the steps in the process too. I mean, just simply from, like, let's say going to concept to live ops. The importance of getting you from alpha to beta, and really kind of, figuring out what those things are. And there are some general definitions of what each of these phases means, and oftentimes every developer and every publisher has a specific way of how they define it, but there's still a couple of ground rules of what each of these phases means. The other important thing too is talking to developers and figuring out what's important to them. So for instance, I mean, it's important to talk to, let's say, your 2D artists, or to talk to your 3D artists, and really try to figure out where they're coming from, and some of the things that stress them out, some of the things that they value, some of the ways that they handle the relationships with other types of developers. Ask questions, talk to them, and get a conversation going to make sure that for you, as somebody who's spearheading the efforts, as somebody who's basically making sure that things get done, are making sure that people communicate, but that you also understand how they're communicating and why they're saying what they're saying. And sometimes managers don't necessarily have the best people skills, and I've certainly been guilty, especially early in my career, of not handling stress and allowing stress to dictate how short and how angry my conversations are with people. And that's not a great thing, especially when you're working on a small team, because everybody talks and everybody is kind of locked in together. So you really need to figure out what the most effective communication skills are. And over the years, somebody who gave me a lot of really good production advice told me about Patents on Leadership, and that's an excellent. I mean, people feel pretty polarized about General Patton, but at least the book has a couple of good steps about how, as a leader, you're supposed to to use your insight and your kind of hopefully gung-ho attitude to make sure that things get done and that people have what they need to get the job done. Another one too is how to win friends and influence people. So at a very basic level, it gives some insight into how you approach new people, how you get the best work out of different types of people. So highly suggest those two books, especially like if you want to brush up on your skills on in how you approach new people and new relationships. So over time too, when we started this company, or the last company 7 years ago, we had a wealth of ideas. We had somewhere around like 10 to 15 ideas, and we felt that all of those ideas were going to get us a lot of money, were going to succeed, were going to get us into the top 10, the top 5. But the more we started kind of going through those ideas, and the more we started talking about them, and the more we started kind of axing the things that we felt that we didn't really, that weren't going to succeed, the more we started getting concerned about our ability to do things, the more we started stressing out about it. So 10 great ideas became 8 great ideas, became 5 potentially great ideas, became 3 things that we really weren't sure were going to work. And the problem with that is that once we started worrying about all this stuff, once we started worrying about our ability to do things, we started losing focus of why we really wanted to make games. We stopped believing in ourselves. And stress is gonna come. I mean, it's always gonna be a part of life, especially if you're an indie developer. But if you're striking out on your own, you want to make sure that you carry that, the reason why you started with you the whole time. And it's really important to not kind of lose focus. So whether you need to have a plaque on your wall, that picture of a kitten hanging on a branch, whatever it is, you need a reminder of why you're doing what you're doing, and you really can't let concerns get in the way. So part of what I learned about it is that as a leader and as a manager, you start taking on a lot of worries yourself. But when you work with a team, especially when you have partners, you have to realize that they're there to share the load with you. Sometimes they have a specific type of insight that you don't. Maybe they have a different way of handling stress. Maybe they're really into yoga or breathing techniques. Whatever it is, you won't know until you talk to them. So it's important to be honest about your fears, to be honest about your concerns, and talk to them. I mean, there's no harm ever talking to people, especially if you're bringing them on because you trust them and because you want to work with them. So failure is often one of those things. Now, it's one of those things that really kind of stops you in your tracks, and then it makes you question everything that you're doing, kind of just, like losing the vision. But the thing about failure is that a lot of people reach a point where they fail at something, and then they don't ever really think about it. They fail at something, and they take it personally. They fail at something, and for them, it just basically means that everything that they do from that point on is going to be a series of failures. But the thing about failure is that you can't let it stop you. I mean, once you do something and once you hit a block, you have to kind of keep going sometimes. I mean, obviously, there are a ton of postmortems out there that talk about, studios that ran out of money, or, studios that had critical people leave in the middle of a project. But the thing is, a lot of the successes were based on the fact that if they didn't have any money, they made damn sure that they were going to find it somehow. If somebody left, they were going to find somebody who was even better, and they were going to join the team, and then they were going to carry forward. And I mean, especially postmortems. I mean, postmortems are big for you to really realize that there are a lot of people out there that failed. Your situation is not unique, but the successes are the ones that really kind of keep going. And it's inspirational sometimes, to realize that you're not alone, that there are other people that have had the same problems. So, reading about it a little bit, or reading about it really kind of helps a little bit, but over time what you really realize is that, you have to keep going. I mean, you have to take a look at failure as a way for you to always improve your process, to improve your mindset, to, as a way to kind of improve how you deal with people. And when you're starting a studio, I mean, you might fail. You're probably going to fail. There will be some failures, I'm not going to lie. But, I mean, you just have to keep going, and you have to realize that the most important thing is to not stop. And, now I find myself in a situation where I started a studio about a year ago with 2 business partners that I met back at Activision. And they're the perfect business partners because we complement each other in ways that really gets us to the point where everybody knows what they're supposed to do. Everybody knows how, what they're going to contribute to the group and to the company as a whole. And, I realized that we're going to stress about things. We're going to stress about, making sure that that we pay people. We're going to stress out about the fact that, we have maybe a month or 2 to deliver a project. But the thing is over the years, after realizing all these, issues that cause, my first company fell 7 years ago, I've learned a little bit more about them. And the good thing too is, as I've grown, I've found business partners too who have grown with me. So I no longer have to tackle all of these stress factors myself. I have a fantastic team, I have fantastic partners, and things are going to go wrong. You know, clients are going to reach that point where they're going to be unable to sign, or they get a little shaky about the price. But you can't let it worry you. You can't let it stop you. And I think the big thing is just to, you know, to take a look at what others have done and to learn from it, and to just realize, I mean, stress is going to be there, but you know, it's always going to be there. You just can't let it hold you down. And I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah, we have time for a couple questions. Anyone have any questions?
Hi, Anwar Dadati from InnoGames. You talked a bit about building your personal relationship skills, and you also stressed a couple of times talk to the people you're working with. It's less a question or more a proposal, and I'd like to hear your opinion on it. What I do in my projects, I'm a game designer, so I'm a communicator. I try to get the developers into workshops. I actually hold the workshops for them, where they try out communication techniques. Mm-hmm. So what do you think about that? Do you think you should also do this?
Yeah, I mean, anything that you could ever do to improve your communication skills is you know, beneficial to the whole process, regardless of whether it's just, you know, working in game development, or whether it's how you handle, you know, people that you meet on the streets. I mean, communication is always going to be there, right? But I mean, the way you handle things is especially, you know, internally and externally, is important. So I mean, anything you can do is good, right? Whether it's just saying hello or smiling at somebody, or just listening. I mean, anything helps. And it's always, I mean, a process of improvement, obviously. But I mean, I would highly suggest that.
So Dave, what's the one thing that you think is the biggest difference between your experience in the AAA industry versus having your own company now?
Well, I think the food was a lot better in AAA. The catering service definitely was, you know, top tier. No, I think the, you know, the big difference between working in AAA and working in your own studio is that, you know, when you're in AAA, you're usually kind of beholden to you know, maybe somebody one step up the chain. But when you're in a small studio, you're really responsible for, you know, for the whole process. I mean, you're responsible for not only just making sure that things get done, but that, you know, people are happy and they, you know, that they have everything that they need to both finish their work, but also to improve as a developer, and, you know, maybe to improve as a person too.
So it sounds like you've done this twice. You know, you did your first time, you learned some things, and you brought some success into your second one. If you were going to do it a third time, not saying that you had to, so hopefully things go well with this take
Mm-hmm.
two, what would you do differently again in the third time? So what have you learned this time around that you think would be helpful for the future?
Well, I think what I would probably, well, if I did it again, I think my wife would probably be a little upset. No, I think, you know, if I had to do it another time, I would probably, I don't know. That's a hard question. I mean, I think I might aim a little higher. You know, I definitely, you know, given you know, the rodeo the first time around, I think I was very kind of conservative in my approach. And being conservative when you're starting a studio is, you know, not bad. But you know, I mean, there are a lot of people who have lofty aspirations, and you know, I think maybe I would try, you know, maybe slightly more difficult projects than we had the second time around, or even the first time around. I mean, there's really, you know, nothing that truly stops you from aiming from the sky. It's just really, you know, the limitations that you really set on yourself. And, you know, I mean, sometimes those limitations are very real. But, I mean, there's no reason for you to not shoot for the sky.
Any other questions?
All right. What is your ratio in terms of your use of time regarding short-term planning and long-term strategic planning, as you are a smaller studio than AAA?
Let's see, the ratio of time spent from one to another. You know, it's kind of interesting. At the beginning of when we started Hyperkinetic, I think we probably, I mean, we had work immediately, so it was one of those things where the short-term planning obviously took up the majority of my time because of the fact that we had very short deadlines. But once we had some time to think about it, I mean, it really is one of those things where, you know, I had to basically, I communicated with my business partners so that we made sure that we were, you know, kind of coming from the same place and that we had the same goals. I mean, so it became one of those things where, you know, the 80% that we spent on short-term planning really, you know, fell down to maybe about 20 to 30% once we actually had everything in motion. And the majority of the time was spent figuring out, you know, 70 or 80%, figuring out what we really wanted out of the company, and, you know, also including some of our other key core members too in the conversation to make sure that, you know, everybody was moving in the same direction and that everybody kind of had the same goals. So, you know, I think the ratio, you know, changes all the time. I mean, we still have those conversations. You know, we're still in the process of figuring it out. But, you know, the important thing is to have those conversations, and the important thing is, you know, to be, you know, to have the same desires, the same goals, and sometimes they'll differ, but, you know, you'll want to figure out what those differences are and, you know, try to figure out whether they're things that you're willing to live with or whether they're things that you're going to have to, you know, in some ways maybe, I don't know, try to figure out what you're going to do with them.
Great. Thank you very much.
All right.
Nice job.